Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Fishman. I'm going to be chairing this panel on building climate jobs organizations in states. Um, I've introduced myself a couple of times today, but I'll just say one more time. I'm Executive Director and President of Climate Jobs National Resource Center, and I've been in the labor movement about 40 years, starting out as a carpenter, 20 years with the carpenters, and then 20 years with SEIU, where I ran a local in New York for 15 years and worked at the national level. I've been a labor activist for about the last 10 years and been incredibly excited these last couple of years as we have been building climate jobs organization in New York and then climate jobs organizations helping to build in other states. And with me today are four people in four states who are going to talk about building their own climate jobs organizations, which seems to be the thing of the moment. You know, as we've heard all day, we're not only in a pandemic crisis, we're in a climate crisis and a crisis of inequality, and we're at a historic moment where labor needs to step forward and take on the crisis of climate change and inequality. With me today are Pat Devaney, Secretary Treasurer of the Illinois AFL-CIO. Pat's also a member of the Executive Committee of Climate Jobs Illinois. Pat previously served as president of the Associated Firefighters of Illinois. Monserrat Garibay, Secretary Treasurer of the Texas AFL-CIO. Previously, Monserrat served as Vice President for Certified Employees with Education Austin. John Harrity is Chair and founding member of the board of the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs. John recently retired as an official with the International Association of Machinists, including 32 years on staff as an organizer, communications director, legislative coordinator, and business rep. And Cynthia Phinney, president of the Maine AFL-CIO. Cynthia is a member and former business manager of IEBW Local 1837, where she represented 1,600 members employed primarily at electric utilities and broadcast stations in Maine and New Hampshire. So welcome all of you to the panel. And we're going to start out by each person is going to give an overview of their work in their state, and then we'll start opening up for questions. So I'm going to start with Pat. I want to turn it over to you to begin.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Mike. It's great to be with you and this distinguished group of panelists and all the attendees on behalf of the 900,000 members and the 1,500 affiliates that make up the Illinois AFL-CIO. I'll tell you, it's also been incredible working with the Climate Jobs National Resource Center as we've gone through the process of developing our own state chapter here in Illinois. So I think it would be beneficial to start by providing just a quick update on the political landscape in our state and how organized labor fits into it. We were very fortunate to have a historic election in 2018, electing a Democratic governor and Democrats into each one of our 6 statewide constitutional offices. Labor was also integral in establishing Democratic supermajorities in both chambers of our state house. 2019 was a historic year for labor as well on the legislative front. The governor and our supermajorities were able to pass a robust worker-friendly agenda, including a $46 billion capital bill that will create thousands of jobs in the vertical and horizontal construction sectors. However, despite the need for it, the administration has not yet been able to tackle the energy policy issues that exist in our state. Many political observers thought a large energy package would be considered in the 2020 legislative session, but so far, as in many of your states, COVID has stood in the way of it. Illinois is currently operating under an energy statute created partly by legislation passed in 2016 called the Future Energy Jobs Act, or FEJA. While FEJA created a fairly ambitious set of renewable energy transition goals, there have been a number of deficiencies identified in the plan and the clean energy incentive process created by it. We also believe it did not adequately address the labor standards needed to ensure a safe and reliable transition to cleaner energy generation. It also doesn't seem to have created a working flight path to our clean energy goals, as Illinois clean generation sources only represent 7% of our total energy portfolio. Further complicating matters in Illinois is the toxic political environment that's been created by a federal investigation and deferred prosecution agreement entered into by the company that provides electrical distribution to the northern part of our state, including the Chicago metropolitan area. So there are a lot of moving parts in the energy environment in Illinois. The good news is that we have a pro-climate and pro-labor governor and General Assembly. Some of the challenges that exist revolve around the politics surrounding the energy space and all the various plans that are currently out there, including one from the utilities, environmental groups. The governor has a process and the senator have working groups that are designed to create energy legislation. While there are many commonalities between the proposals, we believe all of them need increased attention to the labor standards necessary for a clean energy transition that fully supports just transition for fossil generation workers and a strong equity piece for the underrepresented population in the energy workforce. Fortunately for Illinois organized labor, we became aware of the Climate Jobs National Resource Center about 6 months ago through our relationship with one of its board members, Nikki Budzinski. Nikki had just left our governor's administration at the end of last year and walked our informal labor energy table through the process of organizing into Climate Jobs Illinois. I cannot tell you how beneficial it has been for us because of Climate Jobs and their leadership. We have been able to form a coalition that is strategically approaching energy policy initiatives in Illinois. In fact, we publicly launched our coalition last week and have received a significant amount of media attention and positive feedback from our affiliates. Most importantly, we're positioned to leverage our coalition's unity into a major voice in the clean energy discussions in Illinois. So just a quick thumbnail sketch about the process we've used here so far. About 6 months ago, we called a statewide meeting of all of the Illinois AFL-CIO affiliates that possibly could have any interest in creating good labor energy policy in our state. We next created the legal framework for the education and research nonprofit that was necessary to facilitate our process. To date, we've confirmed 9 affiliates that have made a significant investment in our coalition and are part of our executive committee that's charged with making all of our policy decisions. For the last several months, 4 working groups built around energy, building construction, transportation, and just transition and equity have been meeting to build out all of our policy recommendations. We've put together an absolutely amazing research team through partnerships created through Cornell, including our leader, Laura Skinner, the University of Illinois Labor Education Program, and the Illinois Economic Policy Institute. We've also secured a communications team to help build out a campaign around our policy recommendations when we make them. Our executive committee is scheduled to meet at the end of this month, consider all of the policy recommendations from our working group, and in October, we plan to publish them. We feel with our policy recommendations out in October and a campaign being built and the momentum around it, we'll be in a great position for Illinois' fall veto session, which is the week before and the week after Thanksgiving, as well as our new legislative session that begins in January. I personally feel good about where we're at after just 6 months of hard work by our working groups and research team and Nikki leading the entire effort. I'm hoping we've taken a good first step in demonstrating that you do not have to choose between supporting a transition to clean energy generation and the workforce that's working in the energy industry. It's not been an easy road. We've had some hard internal conversations, as you might expect, given the makeup of our coalition. However, we're making great strides in becoming a major voice in the discussions around energy policy and the workforce in Illinois. So that's just a brief update as to what we're doing in the Illinois energy space. And I look forward to hearing from the other panelists as well as answering any questions that might come up about our work here.
That's great, Pat. Thank you. Monserrat, you want to talk about Texas?
Yes. Hola, everyone. Howdy. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this wonderful discussion. So the Texas AFL-CIO is the federation that represents 240,000 union members throughout our enormous, and I mean enormous, state of Texas. We have 4% union membership in our state. However, we are on, our state has really, union membership has been growing for the past years. Texas is the battleground state, and we are in the midst of building the biggest, broadest, and boldest political movement during this election. At the state level, we can flip 9 seats and potentially have a Democratic Speaker of the House. And this will give us the opportunity to make changes, meaningful changes in addressing climate change and global warming. It is really evident for all of us here in Texas that we have a climate crisis. You know, for the past few years, during the months of May and August, we have had, it's been extremely hot. For instance, in Brownsville and East Texas, farmers have lost their crops, and the weather is really affecting everybody. And when it's so hot, of course, people tend to use their electricity even more because they're turning their AC, right? Just so you know, like the research states that by 2050, 1 in every 3 days will be more than 95 degrees in Texas. And this heat is expected to reduce the Texas economy by 13 billion a year. We also have a lot of flooding. The flooding that is been happening during the hurricane season has been devastating in Houston, Galveston, Belmont, Corpus Christi. I personally saw how the Hurricane Harvey just a few years ago destroyed Houston, and you know, I saw my sisters and brothers losing their homes and all their belongings. You know, the bottom line is Texas is the largest emitter of the greenhouse gas emissions and the pollution in the country. And Texas emits just over 700 million metric tons of CO2 per year. We also have I-35, which is in, like, it literally crosses from the border all the way, the highway. And we have about 700 million vehicles traveling through Texas, and that produces 232 million metric tons of CO2 and pollution. And right now we have a really good opportunity with our task force to really understand and be able to have input with different initiatives that would replace all vehicles and have massive campaigns to encourage the use of public transportation and using bikes, for instance, to go from one side to the other. Also, you know, I'm a teacher, and as a union leader, I think we truly believe in the knowledge of power, that knowledge is power. And that is something that we're doing in our task force. We have met already, I believe, 3 times, and we are really digging into all the research and data and how we can really do something meaningful for the livelihood of many union members and our communities. And also we have decided to roll up our sleeves and be proactive because we know that Texas is the top producer of both crude oil and natural gas. And the labor movement needs to be at the table with decision makers to ensure that the voice and the interest of workers is taken into account. And we also know that the reality is that by hopefully flipping the House in November, we will have potentially be working at the state level, but also with the counties in passing different grants and different initiatives to make sure that we have a better, we have different initiatives that will replace some of for instance, the old vehicles that we are having here in the state of Texas, right? And also one of the things that the building trades have been conducting trainings for their members on energy and water efficiency, and they have been performing energy and water efficiency work for decades. So we are in a really good point. It's a very fertile ground in the state of Texas to actually move forward with addressing climate change and global warming. And that is something that we're doing. But at the end of the day, the reality is that not many people are thinking on how the climate protection drives jobs creation and the economy development, and certainly not thinking about how these new industries can potentially create good union jobs. Thank you.
Thanks, Monserrat. I have to say, until I started working with you guys, even though I'd worked in Texas before, I never realized how big the state was. And they always say, in terms of emissions, in terms of consumption, it's just amazing. You guys have done amazing work. Let me ask John Harrity to talk a little about Connecticut.
Sure. Good afternoon, folks. And I would add my thanks to Climate Jobs New York and to the Climate Jobs Resource Center at Cornell, and also personally to Mike Fishman and Lara Skinner, who have put an incredible amount of work into this project and really have carried the ball a long distance in a short time and made a lot of progress. In Connecticut, we have a coalition that actually started out in 2012, and it began with a conversation of about 40 people that were brought together by the Connecticut AFL-CIO, and it included environmentalists and people from the religious community that were concerned about the environment, and then labor people. Actually in 2012, there were still labor people that were saying that climate change was not a labor issue. And that it would be too divisive for us to talk about. But of course, something that threatens the livelihood and even the lives of working people is obviously a labor issue that we can't afford to be away from. So we formed a coalition. It took us a while to get going. I think that really we began to get much more traction by 2015 when we got a grant so that we could have a person working part-time just on coalition work. Connecticut is, in terms of the labor movement in Connecticut, we're about 16% of the workforce is organized. We're the sixth most organized state in the country. Connecticut is a blue state. Both chambers of the legislature and the governor are Democrats and have been for a while. And they're also the current governor and the last governor who served for 8 years are both very interested in climate change. And so we had people that were not opposing us, although we had to work around the utilities or the main opposition, I would say. Our coalition is founded on the idea that we need to have a worker-oriented environmental movement, and that we need to address climate change, and that by addressing climate change, that we should be able to produce a lot of local jobs, good jobs, that they should be union jobs, and that we should use this opportunity also to redress a lot of past inequities, especially in terms of racial inequities and people of color that have been pushed out of the mainstream economy and the energy economy. And so, there's a lot to do in regards to that. We're a 501c3. Currently, we have a full-time executive director. We have a full-time communications director, and we're seeking a third person to run the labor project in conjunction with Cornell. We've had a lot of success over the years. In 2015, we approached the governor and we said, you've got a council on climate change, but it's not occupied and you haven't done anything with it. And the governor said, you're right. And what do you want to do? And he said, basically said, tell us what you think we ought to be doing. And so we've been providing leadership within the state on the issue of climate change since then. We were able to get the utilities charged a fixed rate on their bills, which discourages energy efficiency and renewable energy. We ran a campaign that got that fixed rate cut in half. We won legislation that would boost up and revitalize the program called Lead by example whereby the state puts renewable energy and energy efficiency into state buildings, which is going to save them about $60 million a year, and also will create hundreds of construction jobs, and had been mired in bureaucracy for a long time. Our big victory over the last couple of years has been to go to 2,000 megawatts of offshore wind, and that is going to really create a lot of jobs for the building trades. And we think that New London Harbor in Connecticut could be a center for staging offshore turbine work all the way down the East Coast because of, so we're continuing to work on it. Transportation is now something that we're looking at. 36% of the carbon in Connecticut comes from transportation, and we want to address that issue. And we're just continuing to expand. Right now we've got 33 affiliates, 20 of which are labor unions, and they pay dues on a sliding scale in order to participate in the Roundtable Coalition. And we do a lot of education work, and we feel we're in a good spot to move forward. The challenges, of course, are COVID really knocked everything off the charts, and then we also have to deal with the fact that the building trades right now, they want to have work, and some of the work involves a big natural gas power plant, which the environmentalists are opposed to. I don't think we're going to come to any agreement on that, but it just shows you the kind of tensions that are there. We have to agree to disagree on some things. So I'll leave it at that, but I feel like that Connecticut, we're into it, and we're building on what we've done.
Great, thank you, John. And Cynthia, how about a little discussion about Maine?
Sure, up here in the northeast corner. Really pleased to be able to participate in the summit, and in particular on this panel with all of you talking about this important, exciting, challenging, and fruitful work that we're all doing separately and together. And really want to echo also the shout out to the Climate Jobs Energy Resource Center, working with them and bringing us here to enlarge the conversation. So we started, it's already been mentioned, the fear on the part of many folks in labor that this is a divisive issue. It's a fear that's grounded in reality. We have members. I come from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in my own union. We represent, people who are building solar energy, but also people who run coal-fired power plants, and people who work on the lines that will transmit the energy from wherever we're generating it. But the bottom line that supports those jobs is different depending on, what the energy economy is doing. So within my own union, I've experienced those tensions. And then of course, when you start working across the labor movement in a federation as we are, we have members whose jobs are being made more difficult, or as the climate changes, and who have a personal investment, therefore, in the need to address climate change. And we also have members whose jobs depend on energy and the things that we're doing, the way we are doing them now, and for whom a change could be disruptive and negative. So those are the tensions that we have to balance. And we started this work a handful of years ago, reached out to one of the natural resource organizations and a couple other environmental organizations in the state, just to start building relationship, because we anticipated that working together was something we were going to want to do. It was not something we had done. And we had one local that was already working on some solar, trying to make sure that those jobs were quality jobs as opposed to just getting done as cheaply as possible. And so it made sense to work together with that, with those organizations on some legislation at the time. We had a governor who was deeply opposed to anything related to solar. So we started small that way. And then we were approached when we had a change in the legislature. We were approached by a House member who wanted to put forward a bill she was calling the Maine Green New Deal. And she wanted labor's input from the outset. And so we were really pleased that we had already begun this conversation in our organization. And so we asked ourselves who else needed to be in the room for that conversation, brought in, more of the IBEW and some other unions that had interests related to energy. And were pleasantly surprised. The room was not without tension, but positive forward solidarity movement was what people wanted unanimously. And so we really felt that the time was ripe to be moving this conversation and this work in the labor movement. And not too long after that, we were aware of the Climate Jobs New York project, and we wanted the people who'd been involved up to that point were mostly union leadership. Of course, some unions that were getting jobs, their members were involved, but it was union leadership. And we wanted to expand the conversation more broadly within our federation. And so at our biennial convention, where there were delegates from most of our affiliates, they're all invited, we had Vinny Alvarez and Mike, did you come to that? I think you did, yeah.
You did.
Come and talk about what they had done in New York, building this program to be sure that labor was not just playing catch up, that we weren't, grasping to try to save jobs, but that we were in fact leading the conversation, leading on the ideas that would make sure that as the economy transitions, the jobs that are being created are good family and household and community sustaining jobs, and not just a rush to profit from a change. And so we brought a view of that work to our whole convention, and so folks could talk about it. And following that, pulled together those who were interested in continuing the conversation and talking about what could we do in Maine like this, and began formally working with Mike and Lara in particular. And so in our state, we're a rural state. Our biggest contribution to climate change, it turns out, comes from our transportation sector. There's not much public transportation here. Everyone drives around in cars because everyone lives far apart. And as the team from Cornell has helped us research both to find out what our contributions to the to the climate crisis are, and what our opportunities are if we are to make change. We're looking at that. We're looking at what, if they've helped us do research and also come up with some tentative recommendations. The group that gathered to talk about this has continued. We're moving forward carefully. The reference was already made to, challenging internal conversations. Those have to be had. There are jobs that some unions would like to have for their members that would potentially negatively impact the jobs that other union members have, and those are things to be worked out. And I think that's the tension that we have to work out as a whole culture, is to make sure that as we transition to climate sustaining practices and economy, that we also have an economy that's going to sustain people. We don't want to throw away people who have good jobs. We also want to look at this. This is an opportunity to bring people into the economy who've been closed out from it or made marginal in it. And different unions have different sort of, individual interests along that spectrum, but I see our mission, and I think many of us working on this see our mission as bringing those together and merging them into a vision. And it's been exciting beginning to work on that. We've not yet formed a formal organization, but have a committee that's talking about how that will look for us, and how we might structure that so that we can also put more resources into it and have some staff for it to work on on that. We have a new governor 2 years ago, and so we have a climate council that's made some recommendations. This kind of work is really poising us to be sure, again, that the people who work and who will work in the economy are not being left on the side as the new ways of doing things are designed.
It's great, Cynthia, thanks. And I would just say to all of you, having worked with you over this period of time, you're doing in 1 year what it took us in New York 3 years to do, to have these conversations with your leaders, to bring a group along, to form an organization. And you guys in Illinois in particular, who built this organization literally in about 7 months of work, really kind of amazing. And Connecticut and already had one. But I know it's been challenging, and I'm going to just say to those watching, if you want to ask questions, you can do it through the Q&A app at the bottom of your screen. And Dave Hancock, whose name is up here, will take those questions and get them to us. In the meantime, I did want to take your last point, Cynthia, where you talked about each of you have struggled as you're the state federation of leaders with bringing the whole along, trying to bring everybody along at once, and had some, as you were saying, Cynthia, some unions who are definitely affected by this transition that will take place, who are nervous about it, and you've all made decisions. How have you dealt with that internally? And what did you base your decisions on, or are basing your decisions on as you go along? And any of you who want to jump in on that.
Well, since I was just talking about it, I'll jump in for
Sure.
a minute. We've really made a point of trying to bring the folks who have the differing opinions into the room together, whether that's in small groups or sometimes in larger groups, to really hear each other. And because, a vision that's going to work is going to have to be a vision that includes everyone. And so we need to understand all the affiliates, but also to build a strong organization, the affiliates need to also understand each other. And so we've tried to create places where those conversations can happen and the different perspectives can be heard and understood and shared. And we're optimistic about how that's gone so far. It has not been without tension, but I feel that it has moved forward, and I feel that having the conversations rather than trying to sweep the disagreements or tensions under the rug is making us stronger.
I would just say that in Connecticut with the Roundtable, that we have we made the decision that we would only move forward on projects and on issues where we had consensus, so that if there was a part of the coalition that objected to something, we wouldn't go by majority. We would only go by those things where everyone agreed that we go forward. And if we didn't have that agreement, then that would be an issue that we just wouldn't. Different members of the coalition could pursue their own viewpoint, but we would not pursue it as a coalition. So that's the way that we've dealt with those disagreements that may come up between, for instance, the environmental community and particular unions. And so far that's worked well for us.
Yeah, and I don't think in Illinois, I don't think we differed much in our approach. I mean, we've approached this from the very beginning as we're a coalition of the willing. Everyone who's sitting at that executive committee table has elected to join, and we're using the unanimous consent approach. We might try to talk some people into something, which is a place that they're uncomfortable going. But at the end of the day, we're going to, if there are things we just can't agree on, we put those to the side and focus on the package of issues that will benefit the entire group and all of organized labor. And the other inspiring thing for us is, because we, like I said, we really cast the net wide in inviting affiliates to join this, is, we have the majority are building trades, However, we also have the United Auto Workers. We have SEIU. We have the teachers that are in the process of joining our coalition. So even inside of our coalition, it's pretty diverse in the perspectives and the viewpoints that they bring to the table. But we have been able to, decide on these package of things, and it'll be confirmed at the end of the month that we're going to move forward as with the support of the entire coalition. So it's working out. It's working out well.
It's great. Monserrat, I know
Yes.
you want to talk about what's going on in Texas a little bit?
Yeah, so at the beginning of this year, we had our COPE convention, and this is really when everything really started. We were screening our candidates that we were going to endorse, and we had 2 candidates who were very progressive on climate change issues and the Green New Deal. And granted, we endorsed these 2 candidates, but we had a very interesting conversation with some of our union members, because some of them were supportive and some of them were not, because some of them thought that our candidate was too radical on this approach and how it was going to hurt so many union members. But at the end of the day, we have been having one-on-one conversations, and I call these courageous conversations, right? Because we need to have those. And also I think it's really important that we listen to each other. I'm a teacher, and I often joke that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And this is the time where we're really listening to our union members from the different unions who are feeling very apprehensive on how we're moving forward with this. But it's been definitely, it hasn't been pink and rainbows and roses, right? It's been hard, but I think that that's the beauty of our labor movement, that we get to discuss issues that affect all of us in different ways, but we're able to come together and decide. In our instance was like, okay, are we going to keep endorsing people without really us being on the forefront on what we want to see in the Green New Deal, or what are we going to do, right? So we had to have those conversations, and working with you, Mike, and Lara has been really eye-opening, but it has also opened up the opportunity to look at data, to look at research, and to have really conversations where we need to understand and reflect on what is it at the end of the day, what do we want to leave our children and grandchildren in 20, 30 years from now, right? Because we might not be here, but I think we can all agree that we all want to leave a better world to our children.
I think that's a great point. I mean, one of the things we've all talked about is the labor movement has to have its own view, and that's really what you're building. And to do that, we have to have the best information. And I think that's what we've done with Cornell, is we get the best information about the emissions and what the future will look like. And then we can make real decisions about what labor believes is the right path to get to a clean environment. We all agree on that we need to get there, but we know the path has to be made with the workers' interest in mind. And I think that's what we're bringing to the climate discussion now. We do have one question. We've had a lot of discussion today throughout the whole day about diversity in the labor movement and in the climate movement, and how these jobs get to be representative of the people that have been disenfranchised across the country, particularly in the Black community and the communities of color. There's a question from somebody in Philadelphia who says that their unions have not been diverse in the building trades, and that there's a need to expand the membership. And at the same time, they've had a big layoff of one of the steel mills, where a lot of people are being laid off. So they need, as we build these new jobs, he's asking what's the best way to work with the unions to continue to build a diverse membership as we create these new jobs in the new climate movement. So does anybody want to take a jump at that one?
Let me just tell you a little bit about what we're doing in Connecticut with the offshore wind project, which was that the first contract went to New London, and so we hired a person to facilitate a community benefits agreement between the city of New London, the unions, and the developers to make sure that people from the city of New London, and particularly people of color and people who may not have been had the opportunity to get into the economy and in good jobs before this would be able to have that opportunity. And so that's one concrete way that we've been able to address that issue, and we hope that we're going to be able to duplicate that in other projects.
Great. Other thoughts?
So here with the Texas AFL-CIO, we have, I feel like we have been very intentional in bringing those unions that might not be at the table because, you know, for instance, with me as a woman of color, I think it's really important. Yes, our voices have always been shut down for many reasons, but I think that under President Rick Levy's leadership, we are being very intentional in bringing those voices to the table, but also in making sure that we are listening and learning the stories of how Unite Here member might be affected on how climate change is, and bringing those voices and sharing those stories with one another. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. When the thing about the labor movement is, we often say this, right? An injury to one is an injury to all. And when we're able to share those stories, and when we're able to see that, yes, this is something that is taking place, and we have a responsibility on how to move forward, it's really important.
Yeah, and I would add one other thing in answer to the question, which is that in the United States, we now know 11% of the workforce is union, and in the private sector, only 7% is union, which means private sector, 93% of workers are non-union. And there's a lot of people who are working out there, people of color, people from all communities, men and women who are already working in the industry who need to be brought into the union and who are already doing the work. And that's what we're going to see, I hope, in the green industry. As we build the new wind towers of the future and the solar industry of the future, there's people working there who should be coming into the union already. And they need to be brought in and help to build those into careers instead of low-wage jobs. But that will it will change the diversity of unions incredibly as we go forward. And some of the things that were in the PRO Act has been introduced in Congress, particularly for the building trades, the ending the prohibition on secondary boycott would make it much easier to organize industries. And so as these industries grow, we'll be able to organize those workers into the union, and it will change our membership as we go forward. And it's not just about the jobs that the union will get into, it's about the jobs that are already there and bringing them in. At least that's the way I think about it. And so keeping mindful of the time, we've got a few more minutes. Another question about our membership. What have you heard from your members about doing this work, and what have you done or are you thinking of doing to educate members as we go forward on this work on climate change?
Well, Mike, I think, you know, the first step we took, obviously we've been working through the affiliates leadership, you know, at this point where I think we're just starting to build out an awareness of the work, you know, that we're doing with the Climate Jobs Illinois. But I get a sense if we took the same approach that we have with the leadership of our affiliates, and we can all agree, and your team did a fantastic job laying out the argument for, you know, climate change and the need to address it based on, you know, not only, you know, the effects it has to our country and our world, but on from the economic perspective as to what the impact is going to be on our membership. You know, I think we've convinced them on the science that there's a need to do something. But what we're doing is making sure that as this transition happens to a clean energy, that we are going to maximize the number of good paying union jobs that are out there. It's happening with or without us. So do we want to sit back and wait for somebody else to dictate the terms of it, as there are organizations out there attempting to do? Or do we want to be the one proactively, strategically making recommendations as to how you do this to where there's going to be the most number of good paying union jobs for our members and future members in this new greener energy environment?
That's great. You know, the old saying is, if you're not sitting at the table, you're on the menu. So we definitely want to be sitting at the table. Other thoughts about members?
You know, we always say, I always say sharing is caring. And to be honest, you know, the fact that we have heard the work that New York is doing, that Connecticut is doing, that Chicago, that Illinois is doing, for us, that really allows us to think big and to think of the possibilities. And I think that for our members and our affiliates to be able to hear that they have that y'all had the same struggles in terms of how do you bring this to the table and how do you make sure that you move this work forward. I think to us that's been really helpful, and to not start from scratch has been very helpful, and just to think of it in big broad ways of if New York is doing this, imagine what Texas can do. And of course, as a Texan, we always can do bigger and better, right?
Of course. Yeah. So another question, how have you been received by the climate groups when you start organizing the labor's view of climate and you start building coalition with climate partners, climate activist partners? How have they received your desire to have these be good union jobs? How does that work?
Our experience so far has been positive from the environmental community. They're like, oh, yeah, of course. For the most, you know, I mean, that's an oversimplification, but we've been welcomed to the table. And in fact, we've been invited to more tables than we have the resource to be part of currently, and have had to say, we're getting our own house in order here, but we're here. And so we're on a lot of lists that we're just kind of following. But in our state, we're wanted and welcome for the most part.
That's great.
And I think also, you know, our approach, and it sounds like everyone's, by creating a table that truly is purely made up of labor affiliates and focusing on jobs and the impact to our members. Once people are convinced that that is true, because initially in the discussions we've had, and we tried to reach out to many of the environmental groups and progressive legislators to tell them what we're doing and what to expect from us, there's definitely a sense of skepticism that what is this really about? Is this trying to actually stop the transition to renewable energy, given the impact that it has on some of our affiliates? But once they realize this is purely, you know, a table that is designated to looking after the interests of working people, and particularly during the COVID environment and economic recovery, and using Illinois workers to do the work in the new space, it seems like we gain greater confidence that we can create a partnership and focus on the commonalities or the shared interests. That's
great. That's great. So, John, did you want to jump in?
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to say that the other thing the environmental groups appreciate is the power that labor brings to the equation, that we can get meetings with the legislators, with the committees that we need to talk with, and with the governor and other people when they can't necessarily, or we can get movement where individually we wouldn't be able to do that. So that's been very educational for them, and I think that in response that they've had a great awareness now of the impact on workers of environmental policy, which has been great.
That's great.
If I could add one concrete thing, when our experience with the passage of our Maine Green New Deal, which is not like the national, it's a very different bill. So, but having labor at the table for that, when that bill came up for a hearing, of course, that bill was being shepherded by largely by the environmental community, but we are not the usual suspects to show up to testify in support of a piece of legislation like that. So when they organized their supportive testimony, they put labor on first, and we had apprentices testifying about what their apprenticeship meant to them and what the apprenticeship requirements in this bill were going to mean for other young people entering the Maine workforce. And it was so it was totally not the usual suspects that the committee was expecting to be testifying in favor of this bill. So it really got their attention. And so that was a real power that we brought, as well as what John was just talking about.
That's great. Yeah, I think that the thing that is inspiring about the work everybody's doing is that we know a future is coming that's different than the one we have. We know that we have to stop climate change, and we're jumping in to actually make a difference for the workers who will be involved and for the communities who will be involved. And that's, I think, as Vinny said in an earlier panel today, that's 90% of what we can agree on with the climate groups. You know, there's the 10%, this whole idea of transition is going to be difficult for workers who are in the industry. And the truth is that in the oil and gas industry, there's a larger number of the members of unions who are in that industry than there are organized members. In other words, there's only about 6 or 8% of the oil and gas industry employees that are union nationwide, because that's sort of the average for the private sector. But there are a higher percentage of unions. So we have to pay attention to that and make sure that that transition is workable. And it will take years. It doesn't happen overnight, because until we build the new stuff, we can't shut down the old stuff. It's the same thing I always say. As Alex Lasky said earlier, we're going to need double the amount of electricity we have now if we move out of fossil fuels. That means an enormous amount of capacity has to be built in order for us to make this transition. So we're coming to the end here. Last thoughts from anybody? Things must be said.
I think it's a really good opportunity for the labor movement to work in coalition with other organizations. We're living very critical moments right now. And we really need to direct the people that are really hurting our economies and the climate in our communities. And those are those greedy corporations. And what a better way to build a coalition and really build power by sharing our stories with one another and also working together to make sure that we have a clean planet, for sure.
Great.
Mike, this is something that I tell every group that I address, which is that climate change is the most important issue that they will deal with, or we will deal with for the rest of our lives. And they may not believe that at first, but when they see what's coming, they'll understand that that is the case.
That's great. Great. Well, thank you guys very much. It was a great discussion. I look forward to working with all of you. We had one question that was, is there an Ohio chapter? And I would just say that we don't have people working in Ohio now, but we certainly can get started with when people are ready to go and we can help out. So Cynthia, Pat, Monserrat, John, thank you very much. Great discussion, and look forward to working with you and seeing you in the future.
Thanks, Mike.
For putting it together
Thank
with
you all.
us. It's an
Good
honor.
seeing you all.